Hi, Dr. Michael McLean here. Yeah, I'm just following up from the video I made about the demand uh, which various European nations and Canada have made of the Israeli government of saying that unless they agree to ceasefire and end the war in Gaza, they're going to recognize a Palestinian state, which basically means that partitioning up the land of Israel. That's effectively the only way that that could happen. So I just wanted to follow up with a couple of issues and something else I heard today, which I think just demonstrates the pure propaganda that's surrounding this issue. Uh, and the first one, which I did mention yesterday, but I just want to make abundantly clear, is that there's these widespread accounts of genocide and starvation and the Israeli IDF shooting uh, crowds and all sorts of stuff, and people dying, and how many people have died, how many people the IDF killed over the weekend, etc. And and it was like, but what they ignored was that there's meant to be this great humanitarian sort of crisis, but what they're just ignoring that people aren't reporting on at all is the UN's own statistic regarding what's happening to the aid. Because the IDF, if you like, Israel, are doing astonishing things of humanitarian windows, extended periods of their and Israel with its own organizations on the ground are the only ones that are actually effectively getting aid into Gaza. I think, and the emphasis here is on the effectively, because there's all this aid that's coming in via the UN channels, but by the UN's own admission on their own website, between 85 and 87% of this aid that's coming in is being diverted or intercepted by basically Hamas and its sympathizers. And it's not getting to the people of Gaza, and that is generating starvation. And they want starvation. Even I think even saw an MSNBC interview today where they were interviewing somebody on the ground in there and actually saying, and this person was somebody, a resident of Gaza, and they're actually saying that Hamas wants people starving because it's absolutely great for propaganda uh, that the Western nations eat up, and they are celebrating it. They showed the guy on who I can remember him being, he's one of the chief spokesmen for Hamas when the war first started, and he was on Lebanese TV. He was on, I'm not sure if it was a Lebanese channel or something he was on, but he was saying, "Oh, we've had success in what we attempted to do on October the 7th, because what we wanted to do was bring a spotlight on the Palestinian problem, and also to get a Palestinian state and the unconditional surrender of Israel." And he said we're having success, and he was celebrating the coverage, the recent coverage in the European media. So we we have to understand that this even from the UN's own perspective, that because between 85 and 80% of this aid is supposed to be going in, if that aid got to the people of Gaza, there wouldn't be a starvation problem. If that aid was properly distributed, there would not be a starvation problem. But the UN are complicit in this happening to the aid because they've always had an agenda. They hate Israel. Basically, the UN hate Israel. The 1948 resolution that in the end Israel had to unilaterally act on. He said it was agreed within the UN Security Assembly, but then they tried to backtrack from it under pressure from there was Arab interests and the British who had the mandate, and the British basically betrayed they abrogated the mandate and they sided with the Arabs because basically they wanted the enormous wealth of the oil, and they would rather have worked with the Arabs to get the oil than they were with this, these this silly little Jew, this idealistic. Uh, it belonged to a previous generation. This sort of like this idea of granting the Jews a homeland. It was sort of like a bit of a hangover on Victorian liberalism, that granting the Jews the Jews are coming back to their land, granting them. It's mixed up with particular eschatological views and the sort of like the post millennialism of 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 certain liberal factions. But after the Second World War, after that, that was a long time in the rearview mirror, and they were looking forward to this, this post Second World War world, and they wanted a big chunk of the oil pie. And energy is crucial for any growing or developing economy and recovery. So there was there was a perverse logic behind what the Western nations were doing, but it was only some of that's when the US, in a sense, stepped up and supported the nation of Israel, uh, and and they have since, on our even there was quite a reversal of policy during the time of Barack Obama's of reign. He almost inverted it. He had a very tense relationship with the nation of Israel and with the prime minister, and was and did a lot of work trying to strengthen the relationship and the influence. He was very much into using the influence of the US with Israel to try and get some sort of agreement which worked against the interests of Israel, uh, and trying to come up with some sort of agreement with Iran regarding their nuclear program. And that scandalous deal that Trump withdrew from as soon as it was on there, because it was one of the worst deals that had ever, from the point of view they had no intention of keeping it. And so, in a sense, he was siding uh, surreptitiously, really, with the Arab nations and working against the nation of Israel. And and again, I'll emphasize this point that over half the resolutions of the UN Security Council, and since the Second World War, have been have been on this issue of Israel Palestine. There's other issues in the world. It's astonishing. The nation of Israel is only a couple of miles long at the base, less than 10 miles wide at the top. It's a tiny, tiny, tiny piece of land compared to the enormous land mass and space of the Arab nations. Have a look on the map, see it for yourself. It's a tiny, tiny, tiny piece of land. And so, there's no shortage of land. The Gazans could be, the Palestinian Arabs, if we want to use that name, they could be offered sanctuary in any of those Arab nations. But you know what? The Arab nations don't want them. They will not allow them. Jordan is Palestinian Arab. That's what it is. A lot of people who uh, in a sense, are genetically or ethnically, they're related uh, to the majority population in Jordan is Palestinian Arab. It's just they are run by the Hashemite dynasty or something, which is a completely different ethnic group, who who dominate them. Israel is the only democracy within the Middle East. It's the only one where the over, I think it's something like between 20 and 30% are non-Jewish, sort of like minorities. They're the only state in the whole of that region in which people can be represented within the Knesset, which is like the parliament, and people have equal votes. They have equal rights before the law. So, uh, there's so much misinformation spoken about Israel, and I don't think it can get any worse. This is the second thing I want to point. The first point, yes, about the aid. If the aid got to where it was intended to go, if the UN had the infrastructure and had the people on the ground to protect it and to make sure that the aid got to the Gazans, there wouldn't be starvation. But the second issue, which is, it was shocking when I saw this, but apparently the New York Times uh, had a picture on their front page at the weekend of what and the caption underneath that they were talking about starvation in Gaza, and they had this figure, and it's a gruesome photograph. It's a horrible photograph of a woman holding, somebody looks like they've got this enormous curved spine. It was as if they were in the final stages of malnutrition. But the scandal of the photograph was that, in fact, that this boy that she was holding had cerebral palsy and had complex medical things even before this photograph was taken. And standing in the picture, just out of frame, right next to him was his older brother, who had no problem at all. He was standing up and, was relatively fit. So, but it was completely misrepresenting. They were pushing the narrative of mass starvation. This is what's happening to this, and this is why we must pull all support from Israel, because stuff is going on. There was no attempt to be objective, no attempt to contextualize what they're doing properly. And then what made it actually worse was that Hamas, now this is Hamas released a a video of an Israeli hostage. There's still 20 hostages being held in the tunnels underground. They released a hostage. They released a video. Hamas released the video. Get this. This is the point I'm emphasizing. Hamas released this video, and they had the guy who was basically looked like a skeleton. He looked like if you've ever seen the pictures of the films of the prison camps, when they discovered the prison camps, some people filmed what they saw there of these people who, basically skeletons and were bowed over, thin through starvation. And Hamas released this video of this uh, hostage, Jewish hostage, and they had him repeating some sort of like line, and he was saying about how he's digging his own grave. So he was in this underground tunnel, and he was digging this grave, and he's saying, "I'm now digging my own grave. I'll be lying down to die in this soon." And it was meant as a propaganda video to force Israel, and unless Israel ceases all hostilities, then I'm going to be dead lying on here. So he was being coached what to say. Obviously he wouldn't, as a hostage, but he looked like an inmate of a prison camp. But you know what, none of the media outlets picked that up, even though it was Hamas who released that video as a propaganda video. And you know why? It's because I was listening to somebody commenting about the video, and they were saying that it's like, they were saying there's a term in law where you try to present something or present your case or something, but you end up incriminating yourself, unintentional incrimination. I can't remember the term they used, but it was like unintentional admission or something like that. So the whole video, it shows that they were actually guilty of starving these hostages intentionally, but in making the video, they were trying to say, this is what's happening. Our people are starving. This is what we're doing. And then they saw the captors apparently handing him some food, and they said, well, if you look at the arm of the guy who's handing him the food, there wasn't any sign of starvation. It was a big, strong, fat arm. And so it's like, and so if that video was released and was in the media, and they were concentrating on it and actually reporting, and the focus was on this starving Jewish hostage, uh, you see how that, as an accurate narrative, would completely flip the script, if you like, on what was going on, what's happening in the Western media and the Western nations who were trying to force Israel into some type of premature settlement. Because the absolute worst thing that can happen to Gaza is that Israel stops where it is now, when Hamas is at its weakest militarily, and they've only got one stronghold, I think, sort of like left, where where the fighting and stuff's going on. And the worst possible thing that can happen is that Hamas are left intact and left within that area. Because if you give it 3, 4, 5 years, it will be back again to a state of perpetual conflict and violence. So I just wanted to emphasize that. Uh, it's really, really important that we actually understand that this starvation narrative is propaganda, and it's deliberately put out there by Hamas, and the Western media are eating it up. And the failure of the Western media to even feature what Hamas itself has released, which would show their utter hypocrisy and their utter cruelty towards their prisoners. it, I think, tells us everything we need to know. Okay, so God bless you. See you again.